Starship Combat, the final frontier. What's up, Internet? Jay here with Nerd Rage Against the Machine, and today we're going to talk about Starship Combat. I enjoy a lot of different Starship Combat games, but I'm also a huge Star Trek fan. So this is very similar to my Bolt Action video. This is a compare and contrast of probably the two most popular ways to do Starship Combat for Star Trek fans at this point. On this side of the table, we have the original FOSSA Star Trek Starship Combat Simulator. This is in a lot of ways, I guess, the gold standard. Is the easiest way to put it. It has been the most popular Starship Combat game really since time immemorial. Starfleet Battles, which is not officially Star Trek, it's Star Trek, kinda, if you will. It does have some legal rights to the words, don't get me wrong, and it's a great universe. I enjoy Starfleet Battles, but it didn't have the official Star Trek canon, and it certainly couldn't go into places like the movies, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, etc., etc. FOSSA's license did allow it to go in the movies and even into TNG. However, the license ended, and then we had a pretty big glut, or a pretty big drought of between that and our new competitor, which is Star Trek Attack Wing by WizKids. Now, WizKids is probably best known for the makers of HeroClix, as well as the rights holder at one point for BattleTech. They licensed the rights to the game X-Wing and made basically the same kind of thing. A pre-painted, pre-assembled tactical Starship Combat game that feels a lot like X-Wing, but with a very definitive Star Trek twist. So we're going to kind of go over both products and kind of what's the good, what's the bad, what's the nerdy, what's the ugly, and let you guys kind of decide for yourself which way you would want to go. So the first thing, of course, is, looking at the rule sets. I will say out immediately, this is the easier rule set. This is the one that's going to be much more pick up and play. Now, I'm not a big person who's going to complain about complexity one way or the other. In the early days of gaming, for me, I heard a lot of fans who would, if it's too simple, then you're too much of a simpleton, and that kind of logic was very permeant into the gaming culture. The more complex it was, the more realistic, and therefore the better. Whereas nowadays, a lot of games we tend to favor rules light. For me, I don't believe in too complex. I do believe in too complex for the job it's trying to do. And I don't think that Star Trek Starship Combat Simulator is too complex. I think it's right at the edge. It's right there. It's good enough. It gives definitely satisfying tactical details. You are dealing with the structure, the hull, the size of vehicles, and all that is pretty well represented in this system of rules. What's more, you do have the ability to customize and build your own ships. And there are plenty of ships to choose from. One of the things about FOSSA is when they got the rights to do it, they built a lot of ships, a lot of very wacky ships. Like this is the Chandley class. It's a very different kind of vessel. The downside, of course, also is that they did lose a license right after about the first or second season of TNG. So there are some TNG ships, like the Galaxy class, does have rules. I think the Stargazer does, but they're not everywhere. But again, there's also a lot of fan support and fans who have gone through and used the rules to build ships, to build Cardassian vessels, build more Ferengi vessels, more Romulans. So, if you're okay with unofficial, it's a good system for that as well. And there is a good community out for it. The system itself is D10 based. It does deal with things like power management, how much warp energy you have, how much impulse energy, having to put that into spend to how many shields you get per turn, how many weapons you're going to fire and what arc they're firing in. And arc fire is very important in this game. You're cutting through each other's shields. If you've played Starfleet Battles, this is similar. It's more streamlined, I think, than Starfleet Battles, especially if you add everything into Starfleet Battles, then it becomes a little too unwieldy. This is still easier in that respect, but it is, again, very meaty, very grindy, very crunchy as far as a set of rules. Now, by comparison, Star Trek Attack Wing is going to use its own customized icon dice for hits and misses. The ships are always pre-painted, pre-assembled. Everything's pretty much right in this box. And then you're buying each ship individually. You're buying fleet packs to keep up your army. The other thing with this one is it is new. It is still available. This is actually, I bought this, I think, less than 3 months ago. And this is the second edition starter as opposed, all my stuff's kind of fallen out. But this is the second edition starter as opposed to the first edition starter. You can tell because the original one was Klingon, Romulan, Federation. This one is just Klingon versus Federation. They also did some big ships like Deep Space Nine and the Borg Cube. This does carry into the Dominion War, the Breen, the Ferengi. But it also goes back and does things like classic Star Trek, the Enterprise. There is actually an animated series box set so that you could use this ship specifically from the animated series with animated crew. Now, for those of you familiar with X-Wing, the rules are very similar to X-Wing. One of the biggest differences I've found is the fact that where in X-Wing you buy a ship and it might have like Luke Skywalker's X-Wing and then generic X-Wing as your two options, or maybe you Wedge Antilles X-Wing. This one allows you to choose the crew as a separate piece. So you can take a Galaxy class, you can take the Enterprise, or you can take a generic Galaxy class ship. But then you could also put Picard, Riker, even Kirk in charge of that ship. Sulu, Decker. There's all sorts of captains that are part of those counters and sets that are in there. So you could say have, again, Captain Sulu captaining the USS Akira as opposed to the Excelsior. You could put Jonathan Archer in charge of a Galaxy class vessel. Illogical, sure, but can be fun. The rules use a blind movement system and templates, exactly like X-Wing. You have the movement dials. There is, for the most part, other than some arc changes and the whole thing about captaining, this game is very similar to X-Wing. If you've played X-Wing, you're not going to miss a beat playing this game. Now, that, again, also brings up another difference between the two that's worth pointing out. This is a good game, I think, if you're doing fleets. One of the things I ran at a convention one year with this was I took a fleet of Klingons versus the Borg Cube. Basically, the idea of what if they went to Kronos instead of to Sol as their destination. So it was a line of Klingons trying to defeat the Borg instead of a line of Federation ships. And it ran pretty well. It ran pretty smooth, and worked out to be an enjoyable little game. Whereas with this game, the detail is such that the more ships you put on the table, the longer the game is going to get. It can become a crawl beyond like 4 to 6 ships. But for something like, say, an RPG with Starship combats, or even that lone sub-hunt kind of mentality that you see like Star Trek II, this is going to definitely scratch that itch. And you find that micromanagement in this game to work to its advantage there, because again, you're starting to think about, oh my God, my port side warp engine is down to half. Now what? Those are the kind of decisions you're going to make here that you're just not going to make here. This is a much more of a broad overview game. Personally, I think they both have their purposes. I tend to lean more toward this just because as I've gotten older, it's just easier to get into and easier to get others into. But I definitely do see the value in this. The other big thing with this one is, of course, it is going to be harder to find because it's been out of print for several years. eBay is going to be your best friend here, or Noble Net Games or something like that. The other thing is the ships, where these ships, again, you can probably find easily enough. These ones, I've seen going for $50, $60 a ship. However, there are 3D printed versions. These are all resin 3D printed ships that I've done, except for the Starbase, which is actually an FDM print I did just because I wanted to be cheeky that way. But you know, you have all the different races here from the movie and TV era: the Gorn, the Romulans, the Klingons. And FASA had their own, like I said, a lot of designs that were never shown in Star Trek again. So there's a whole different galaxy of ships that are available. I definitely recommend checking out both. I'm going to give them both. Honestly, I'm going to give them both a 4 out of 5. I think they both do a good job. Like I said, this is going to be newer, easier. You know, if you're wanting to get more of your non-gamery or X-Wing gamery kind of friends into it, this is going to be 1,000 times more likely than this. However, again, if you want something with higher tension, with greater management, and where, you know, every point of energy matters somewhere, this game does definitely rock for that. So with that, I'm going to just say, you know, find yourself some 3D printable models or pick up some pre-paints. Get your ships ready. Arm photon torpedoes. Red alert. And happy gaming.